And welcome to the Rob Call Bottom Up Show. This is a really special show. We've got an amazing collection of people. I've never done a show with so many people on it before. We've got Thom Hartmann, who's the host of the Thom Hartmann Show. His website is thomhartmann.com. His latest book is The Hidden History of Monopolies. And he's got, how many books do you have, Thom?
I don't know, 30 something.
A lot, and in many languages too. And we have Gregg, whose newest book is How Trump Stole 2020. And Gregg is an investigative reporter who has written for and reported for BBC, The Guardian, and Rolling Stone. Lately, he's had his report released by Black Lives Matter and the ACLU, and his investigation of illegal vote blocking in Georgia could affect the Georgia runoff elections, and his website is greggpalast.com. And Jonathan Simon is a long-term election integrity activist and researcher and analyst, and his website is codered2020.com. And I convened everybody because there's been all this talk, and it started really early. I mean, I think I first heard about it from Thom in May, that there was this idea of the Trump campaign and the Republicans stealing the presidency. And then a couple of weeks ago, I started writing about it with interviews from the three of you, and nobody was covering it in the mainstream media. And now everybody's covering it in the mainstream media. And the latest news just came out just a couple minutes ago, really, that the people in Michigan confirmed the vote. There was a big question about that. So what I wanted to try to do was get ahead of the curve again and see where you think things are now. Now, Jonathan, you said it didn't matter if Trump won or lost all of these lawsuits. He's just trying to make things delayed. So that's another piece of the story. So where do we start? Gregg, you said you had some news that you just broke that changed some things in Georgia. What happened there?
Yes, proudly reporting for the Thom Hartmann Show. My team in Georgia got a notice at midnight saying, with a rules change tucked into the bottom of a little notice of a Board of Elections meeting, that the state of Georgia will now, are you ready for this, block your new registration before this, life and death runoff on January 5. The registration deadline is December 7th. If you try to register for this runoff, they can block your registration if you don't have a car registered in Georgia and proof that you have paid the registration tax on the car. Now, I just spoke to the ACLU and others and our other lawyers. I'm laughing because it's so horrible that it's like a bad joke. It's like having to buy a car to vote is probably the most expensive poll tax that's ever been.
I mean,
Brian Kemp's brother-in-law on a dealership.
Now they can't do it. Hey, if you have a dealership, can you vote many times? But they can't actually block you for not buying a car in Georgia. But they can say I can't say, they're claiming that they're going to use this as evidence that you don't live in Georgia, therefore you're a fraudulent voter. And they're not going to stop you. They're going to say you'll be given a hearing, usually have 30 days notice, and you can prove that you're a citizen. Almost no one shows up at these hearings. And even more, the hearings are almost certain to be in January after the runoff. This kills off, as you can well imagine, Black people in Atlanta. That's the core of the Senate Democratic vote, is Atlanta, and you have low-income people. And who doesn't have a car? People who don't drive, people who low-income people, and people in urban areas. That's the entire Democratic vote. And by the way, and students, and among those students who had to fight this when they tried this gambit a couple years ago successfully, they try to block my daughter from voting. She's a Savannah resident.
But there's so little time. That's a big part of the problem here.
Exactly.
But this shows just how crazy, how bloodthirsty they are to do anything to break the rules and to keep people from voting.
Yes, it's vile. And by the way, that's how I met on this very issue. of blocking registrations, how I met Stacey Abrams in 2014 with the Reverend Warnock, who's now Senate candidate. Stacey was at the Ebenezer Baptist Church complaining about the fact that her group had registered over 50,000 young people, voters of color, mainly young students. And after 6 months, the Secretary of State, a scammer named Brian Kemp, I believe he's now governor, and this is how he pulled it off. He never entered those registrations on the voter rolls. He literally just said, we don't have time, we don't have clerks. And those voters were blocked from voting in the 2014 Senate race. That was another Senate race. So look, they didn't just invent this stuff for this race. Georgia test drives the latest in Jim Crow techniques. This is their laboratory for knocking off black voters. So as far as they're concerned, they couldn't have landed in a better place for a life or death Senate runoff.
Yeah. So but I want to focus on this Trump coup, this attempt to take it out of the Electoral College. What's the status of that now? What's your take on that?
Well, I know a lot, but I want to defer to the expert, Thom Hartmann.
Tom?
I don't think that the Trump coup is a Trump coup any longer. I actually was reporting on this in March of this year. A friend of mine in Washington, D.C., who's conservative, who used to be on my show a lot, just mentioned in passing to me that there were some people that he knew in the Trump campaign who were talking about the 12th Amendment, and that if they could have enough uncertainty in enough states, then the election would get thrown to the House of Representatives and Trump would stay president. And so I wrote a long piece about that for Alternet, that they put a god-awful title on, something like "Democrats need to prepare if Trump refuses to leave office," or something, and it wasn't about that at all. And but it was up for a couple of days. And I did a deep dive into the election of 1876. I mean, it's like a 3,000 word deep dive piece. And then everybody ignored that. Nobody took it seriously. I would tweet about it, I'd talk about it, and everybody's like, no. I talked about it on the radio for weeks. All of my listeners can recite the 12th Amendment to you, but that was it. So now it's coming around, but it's too little, too late. And he really didn't prepare the ground, and he telegraphed it way too much, and he just did it incompetently. So two things out of this. Number one, the next guy, who I think is probably going to be Tom Cotton or somebody like him, is not going to be an incompetent ass like Donald Trump. Donald Trump, constantly gets in his own way. The next guy is going to be a very competent Benito Mussolini style fascist. And number two, Donald Trump is no longer running for president. He's no longer essentially in this race. It's over. He's not president anymore. But he opened this PAC 3 weeks ago. I'm averaging about 9 or 10 fundraising emails a day from him, from people associated with him. They all point to the same place, the Save America PAC. 60% of all the revenue goes there, 40% goes to the RNC. And that PAC is a leadership PAC, which means that Trump can use it for most of his living expenses, all of his travel expenses, holding rallies, doing anything he wants. He can use it for a campaign for 2024. It's basically tax-free money that he can just funnel right through without ever having to pay income taxes on it. And he can also use it to support other politicians. So, he's figured out that his scam of being a money laundering machine using real estate for foreign oligarchs, it was a good run for about 2 decades, but it's not going to work anymore. He can't do that anymore. So he's got to come up with a new scam to keep himself going. And this is going to be it. Donald Trump, perpetual politician.
So you don't think there's any vulnerability in any of the states left for Trump to do anything?
No, Gregg, it's math.
You're giving us a face, like maybe.
Well, I the funny part is when Tom tipped me off to this in March, and then I did my own deep dive. In fact, go to greggpalast.com or Thom Hartmann and Tom's website, and you will see, I think you have it on yours too. It's a 4-minute little film that Tom and I did, how Trump can lose the Electoral College, lose the vote, and still become president constitutionally or reelected constitutionally. But so we're really quite afraid that you have to understand Article 2 of the Constitution says that legislatures determine the delegates for the Electoral College, not the voters. Your vote is advisory. That's up to state laws. When the Constitution was conceived, it was this was the upper house, the equivalent of House of Lords, and they didn't want plebs picking the president. So we ended up with. So the important thing here is that the legislatures could simply say, oh, there's too many fraudulent voters, too many fraudulent ballots from Venezuela, and not certify anyone. If you have 3 states, Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, for example, I think that would be enough to deny Biden the 270 votes he needs in the Electoral College. Even if Trump doesn't get it, then it would go to the House of Representatives, and Nancy Pelosi doesn't pick it out of her sorting hat. It's 1 state, 1 vote. So California gets the same vote as South Dakota. 26 delegations are currently in Republicans' hands. That may rise, but 26 is enough. 1 state, 1 vote to reelect Donald Trump constitutionally. I agree with Thom. I think it's over. They missed their chance to create the mayhem and stop the count. Remember, in 2000, they pulled this trick off successfully. But the way that they did it, they got the Secretary of State, a woman named Katherine Harris, to stop the vote count when Bush was officially 500 votes ahead. They left 178,000 votes uncounted, mostly in Jacksonville, which is an African-American city. And so they just simply stopped the vote. This time they didn't stop the vote count. So you literally have to reverse the vote count. And that's going to be uncomfortable for legislators. Even Bush said back in 2000 that he was worried that his legislature, which did send the George Bush delegation to the Electoral College, or selected those delegates, he was worried that they were going to get wiped out by their constituents. A lot of Republicans represent constituents that vote Democratic in presidential elections. They want to hold their seats. I think it's over for Trump on this one. But Lawrence Tribe, who had dismissed what Thom and I said and said, that can't happen. There's something called the Electoral Count Act of 1878. You can correct
87.
me, Thom. 1887. Thank you. I knew you'd correct me. So he said, don't worry, the Electoral Count Act. Well, most legal scholars believe that act is on its face unconstitutional. Now Tribe is saying, it's going to go to the Supreme Court, but don't worry. It's going to be 5-4 against Trump, because you can count on John Roberts and Amy Covid Barrett to vote against Trump's constitutional coup d'etat. If we're waiting for Amy Barrett to save our republic, we're in trouble. But I actually don't have, I think the Tribe he says it's possible. I'm beginning to see that chance fading.
So that would leave, it looks, so unless Kemp doesn't allow Georgia to go through, is he in the way of it in Georgia, Kemp?
Well, there was the just so you know, if you go to GreggPalast.com top story, you will see white supremacists and Alex Jones out there in front of the governor's mansion saying if Kemp doesn't use his gubernatorial power to stop the certification in Georgia, that they're going to create a new party called America First. That's really scares the hell out of Kemp. I've been tracking this guy 7 years now. He's very worried about it, but he's also worried about the fact that he now is governor of a white minority state. He's got to start tacking back out of Trumpville and start talking to other voters, because he knows he's facing Stacey Abrams in 2 years for a rematch, and he's in hot water. So he doesn't know. He can't, he doesn't know whether to sit or go blind, because on one hand, if he doesn't move to protect Trump, he stands a third party challenge. If he does move, if he protects Trump, he's going to lose a lot of Georgians.
Yeah. Well, all he has to do is make it so that if you want to vote, you have to own a $500,000 house.
I think you should be required to wear a hat.
I'm sorry. I think you should shave your head. So, Jonathan, what's your take on all this at this point?
Well, there's first of all, I never count chickens. we've counted chickens too often. So, I do think Trump is finished, but there are a few live chickens left, as Gregg pointed out and Thom pointed out, and who knows. That's as far as Trump goes. There's a great Faulkner quote that says you can't get away from a shoddy job, and virtually everything that Trump does is shoddy. This was no exception. You got Sidney Powell, you got Giuliani, making a complete hash and mess of things. Now, the idea was to delay, was to force it to the House. We could have a Supreme Court interpretation of the word appointed in the 12th Amendment. I don't think any of that's going to happen. But what really disturbs me is that Trump, I think unwittingly, was basically tabbed to run a kind of resistance. And think of a sweep play in football. He's like a guard pulling out, and the resistance really is to serious investigation of the forensics of this election. So if you're Mitch McConnell and you're Karl Rove, you got out of this election basically everything you wanted. I'm taking it as assumed that they did not want Trump. They just have to stay in good with his base. But they also got Trump, and this was very predictable, to play a very, very useful role by mounting this, really outrageously bogus set of challenges. He's taken election integrity off the map for those of us who actually labor in the trenches of election integrity.
I cringe.
And we can't come forward now with any evidence that would help him. For very obvious reasons. We can't even broach the question. And obviously the knee-jerk response from the powers that be, the media, the political cast, has been, this was a beautiful election. It was a perfect election. Nothing to see here, folks. Better than ever. Let's move on. So we're in a ridiculous place because we have Trump on the one hand screaming fraud bogusly, and we have the whole system coming to the defense of an election that we know is pretty much indefensible. And it's very hard to pick your path as an election integrity advocate who has seen that actually this election was a flat out disaster for the Democratic Party, and it will be very hard for the Democratic Party to have any real chance of holding power going forward.
Did you see rigging against the Democratic Party in this election?
That's what the forensics say. Again, I do some people look at the hard evidence or try to find the hard evidence. We look at the soft evidence. We look at exit polls. We look at tracking polls. We look at numerical patterns, statistical patterns, anomalies, and that whole thing, and I have a very telling scatter plot to share, but for now I'll just, tease it. That whole thing points, yes, very much in the direction of a massive shift of votes against the Democrats all the way down the ballot, and also for the popular vote for president. Either that or all the polls, in spite of all their efforts to deal with this chronic problem of always coming out to the left of wherever the vote counts come out. And they're fanatical about error correction, and they've certainly, made some rightward tweaks to their polls. And in spite of all that, they're further off than ever. So it's one of the two. They're both pretty implausible. The entire polling industry could be correcting their errors and still be even further off than before they made the corrections, or you have a massive systemic rig of the vote counts that we really can't see.
Well, let me just kind of summarize what you just said.
Yep.
What you just said was that the votes were rigged against the Democrats' down ticket.
Well, I didn't say they were rigged. I'm saying that the forensic indicators are what they, the red shift. When we talk about the red shift, vote counts come out to the right of the polls and the exit polls, and competitive races come out to the right of non-competitive races.
Forensics make it look like something was done to influence the polls against the Democrats, and Trump has been running as a foil, putting together a narrative and story so that nobody will pay attention to that.
Yeah, I think Trump is acting on behalf of Trump. But I think if you're Rove and McConnell and you're gaming this out, and my rule of thumb is that if I can think of it, and Gregg can think of it, and Thom can think of it, and you can think of it, Karl Rove can think of it. Mitch McConnell can think of it. They're no idiots. If I were gaming it from their position, I would say, look, we can get away with a free rig against the Democrats. We know what Trump is going to do if he loses. He's going to come out with all this bogus, garbage about Dominion machines or whatever else they come out with. It's basically going to close the field down to legitimate questioning of the election.
You mentioned a scatter plot. Why don't you show us that? What's the deal with that?
Okay. Well, we got to do a screen share. So let's see what we got here.
While you're doing that, guys, Gregg, the mainstream media did not give you much attention when it came to the taking away of all those hundreds of thousands of voters' ability to vote in Georgia. And Thom, they certainly didn't pay any attention to you and your concerns about the strategy that Trump was going to use, taking the election into the House. But now they're paying attention to what's happening in the House, not giving you the credit which you deserve, but you're used to that. You had the same thing happen to you with Hunter Farmer and Johns Hopkins. It's a long story, but but how do we make this happen in the next couple of weeks so that what you guys know, what we know here, gets to the mainstream? I'm happy to say that, I talked to you guys and I reported a couple of weeks ago, and, now all of a sudden the mainstream is reporting it. You guys started talking about it back in March. How do we get the mainstream to pay attention to this now?
Gregg?
Well, in my case, I've kind of switched. I'm kind of taking a Michael Moore page, which is trying to work through entertainment divisions of the media by working with celebrities like both Thom and I. He's close to Leonardo DiCaprio and has helped us connect so that, for example, we put out a film on the purges and we did it through Entertainment Weekly and then launched from DiCaprio's site. So we go around them and we use Deborah Messing and Yvette Nicole Brown, both big giant TV stars, A-list celebrities, and they are and so we got 7 million views of our film warning you about the purge in Georgia. And then we sneak through some by working with the ACLU. We got into the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, things like that. And of course, we do a massive amount of work with African-American media. All day, you're the only pale face I have online other than Thom for the day. I'm doing other African-American media, especially aimed at Georgia. So basically, we're sneaking around them. I'm doing the Michael Moore trick. Put on the chicken suit, say it's entertainment, and get to the people. And that's how I have to do it. I mean, I got to tell you, I have worked. I was working earlier this year with both The Guardian, but they're, don't get a lot of U.S. attention. Then I switched to the Washington Post, just so you know. But it's just very, very difficult to get the word out through the mainstream media. But you know what? I got to tell you something. At this point, they're almost irrelevant. This morning, after the Thom Hartmann show, or just at the same time, we issued a tweet and a Facebook posting about that Georgia move. And so now I'm not sure we've killed it. It's chess game. They're maneuvering. They said, okay, we're not going to do a rule. We're going to do a guidance. Now that has about the same effect. But in other words, you heard them go, ouch, when we fired that arrow through Thom and through the net. And we're getting a lot of progressive radio and others to get on it, but especially African-American news media. So in other words, we're going around these guys. That's the only way to get the word out.
Goliath. I mean, what do you call that? The Goliath story, because he didn't use the same kind of weapons or the same warfare strategy. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book on that. So, okay, you're up. Ready, Jonathan?
Here we go. You got it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just what everybody needs, a scatter plot this close to Thanksgiving. I don't know. A lot of dots. What are we looking at here? When we looked at the key races, the Senate races, some of the presidential states, races in the swing states, looked at the competitive House races and stuff, we saw a lot of red shift. We saw a lot of situations where the vote counts came out to the right. And many situations in which that shift was well outside the margin of error of any of the polls
What
involved.
does that mean, redshift coming out more to the right? You've been
Well,
doing this for many years too, right?
Yeah, I mean, the vote counts are more to the right. So for instance, if the exit polls or some tracking poll had, let's say, Clinton Kerry 50-50, and Clinton Trump 50-50, and it came out Clinton 45, Trump 55. So that would be on the margin, it would have been a 10% net shift to the right towards the Republican candidate.
And
Sometimes this involves two Republican candidates or two Democratic candidates, but most of the time we're looking at it with, a Republican versus a Democrat.
And this is why the exit polls stopped being reported by the mainstream media, because this kind of stuff kept happening.
Yeah, I mean, every year they were accurate and relatively accurate in 2018. God only knows how. But the other thing we know about 2018 is Karl Rove took it off. So maybe there's a little correlation there. Generally with these shocking elections, and there have been quite a few of them since 2000, including 2002 when they had to scrap the exit polls altogether because they were so far off. Basically, we've seen a very consistent and pervasive shift in one direction. We don't see any blue shift. Now, some of this may be due to suppression of voters who come in and wind up voting provisional. They think they voted, their votes don't get counted, but they answer the exit poll and say they voted for a Democrat, and so that could account for some of it, but not all of it.
So Jonathan, if I could real quick, just looking at this, it looks to me like what this scatter plot is showing is that the midpoint of all the red races is right on the 0 point of expectation. In other words, basically what was predicted, there were errors up, errors down, but what was predicted in terms of Republicans winning was what happened. But over on the Democratic side, it looks like that center point, if that's what that crosshair is,
yes,
is down about 6 points. So what was predicted for where the Democrats were going to perform, the actual performance was 6 points lower than what was predicted. Is that what this says?
Close, but not quite a cigar. You're on the right track. The red dots, these are all solid Republican districts. So now, why would we even bother looking at solid House districts? Nobody's interested in solid House districts because these races are non-competitive. I mean, most of them have competitors in them, but they're decided by margins of 40%, 60%, whatever. So this was not the first thing I looked at, but it was along the way, and it just hit me between the eyes really hard. And the reason is this. A lot of these races are not even polled. This is 538 voodoo. They use prior election results. They use demographics. Very, very rarely are these races polled, especially the ones further to the extremes. What's the point of polling a race where one candidate has 80% of the vote? So these are predictions, and in theory, these should both be sitting on these centers of gravity here should be net, the average should be sitting on the 0 line. In other words, a red shift is down, blue shift would be up, and they shouldn't be shifted at all because you have a really large N. You have a lot of noise. These predictions are not tremendously accurate, but when you bundle them all together, they have a center, and this is where the center should be.
Okay, so now, Greg, you have another comment you want to show another screen?
Yes, if I could just, let's see, how do I do this? I see share screen.
Yeah.
Okay, wait. Now, where are we? All right. Sorry.
I'm going to turn yours off, Jonathan, so that.
Okay, I'm going to have to come back to it because I didn't actually make the point
so
of what it shows.
You see my screen now, the numbers.
Give it a second.
Let's see. Let's do this.
You gotta do something to share it.
Share screen. Okay, I just hit the button. And what am I showing?
And you choose the screen to share.
Yeah, you got to choose whatever.
You gotta pick this.
Okay, share. All right, come on, share. I hit the share button. I'm on the thing.
Then you double click on whatever the.
Yes, I see the share button and I see the screen. Okay, I'll tell you what. I'll just tell you the numbers. I don't know what's going on here. Now I can't. Well, it doesn't matter. It's not working. Share computers. Okay. Anyway, let me read you a couple quick numbers. So you can all write this down. If you have a cat nearby and a marker, you got it. Okay. Ballots rejected. This is from the Elections Assistance Commission. It's not from Gregg Palast or my black helicopter. According to the U.S. government in 2016, 1,913,369 ballots, a smidge less than 2 million, ballots were cast and rejected. In addition, that's 2 million. Add another million, or 925,973 provisional ballots cast and rejected. Mail-in ballots, 3,033,000 rejected or lost. Registrations purged, I believe this number is way low. 1 million people who showed up to vote couldn't because their registration was purged. 1,088,400. Wrong ID, people rejected and sent away from the polls, 646,671. In others, officially, the dirty secret of American elections is that people cast votes and they don't get counted. You don't have to even have any messing around with the computers. If you added up these votes, you're looking at 5.8 million ballots not counted. And that's, again, the official number, plus throw in another just short of 2 million voters sent away. Now, if they were polled, for example, you go to an exit pollster when you leave. I've never heard anyone ask, oh, did you cast your ballot provisionally? Do you know if your ballot counted or was rejected as spoiled because you didn't properly fill it in? If they get called by a pollster, did you vote or are you certain to vote? Absolutely. I've already mailed in my ballot. You don't know if it's been counted. So, especially because of the mass rejection rate, 22%.
Well, this year,
so in other words, that explains. And if it were random, here's the point: if it were random, these 5 to 8 million votes and voters not counted. If it were random, it wouldn't matter. But if you're black, the chance your vote will be disqualified for technical reasons. That rejection pile is 900% higher than if you're white. 300% more likely to be shunted to a provisional ballot if you're black, Asian, American, or Hispanic. 1,200% higher if you are below 24 than if you are above 65. In other words, the rejection pile is democratic. And that explains much of this red shift. It's not rocket science. You don't have to imply anything. And while I think that the statistics are pretty damn impressive, you can simply look at the votes not counted. And there you explain this weird outcome. And I agree with Jonathan. The most dangerous thing here is the media trope that we had a wonderful election and Donald Trump is crazy because our election is perfect. Joe Biden says they're giving the wrong impression of American democracy. No, they aren't, because they read Gregg Palast's report or they watch me on BBC or Al Jazeera, and they know exactly what's going on in America, and it ain't democracy.
There are not enough people who are doing that, though. So people can learn a lot more about it with your book, How Trump Stole 2020, and Tom's book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. They're both really valuable books that really spell it out, just how this is being done, just what causes those scatter plots to happen the way they do. There's Code Red. Jonathan.
Yeah, don't forget Code Red, guys.
Code Red.
Can I go back to my and polish off that shared screen?
Yeah, make your biggest point first.
There we go. Yeah, I know. Well, it's tricky because it's kind of a second order thing. So the issue here is, why are these two groups different? Why did this work? The polls worked, or the predictions worked, in solid Republican areas and did not work in solid Democratic areas. You'd expect them to be the same wherever they were. If we have massive problems with the polls, they'd both be down here red shifted. If we have no problems with the polls, we'd basically have them all basically up here on the line. And the hypothesis is that these races, which really didn't matter, none of these winners were changed. Nothing on this graph. None of these winners were flipped. These races that didn't matter, they were caught up in a larger, if you want to call it rig, or a larger operation that happened to pick up. And this actually supports Gregg's point. because these races were on the same ballots as the presidential race, as key Senate races, as whatever. House races, state legislative races. Well, these are the House races, but state legislative races, Senate races, the president race, things that were high value targets were on the same ballot as these. This implies what amounts to a full ballot rig that happened to pick up these races inadvertently because these races didn't matter. Now, how does that happen? One way is exactly what Gregg's talking about. These ballots just didn't get counted. Where are these ballots located? In really high Democratic CDs, congressional districts, as Willie Sutton says, and John Brakey often quotes, why do you rob banks? That's where the money is. These are where the Democratic votes were. And this is where you go if you're Rove or McConnell or anybody that wants to shift the race towards the Republicans. You're going to take it from big pools of Democratic votes because that's where the votes are to take, and that's where theft won't be noticed. These ballots either didn't count, or they weren't counted, or they were shifted. And that's a hell of a lot of ballots. We're looking at probably about somewhere between 5 and 7 million ballots, which incidentally is just about the gap between the exit polls and the tracking polls versus the vote counts in the presidential race for the national popular vote in the presidential race.
So Gregg and Thom gave me a half an hour. We've passed a half an hour. Thank you, gentlemen.
You're very welcome.
Welcome to stay, or if you need to go. But I wanted to keep my promise and keep it to that time frame.
And I thank you very much. I would love to stay, but now I have ACLU on the line, and we gotta, we still have to get to work, not just talk about it.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Please read Thom's book. I'm serious. It's really essential especially because it brings in that important history. Vote thieving didn't start with Bush in 2000. Very important. Please read the hidden history of the war on voting. And of course, how Trump stole 2020. He's still stealing. They're stealing a Senate race. You can download that, get the download version, the audio version, or the comic book version for free at greggpalast.com. Thanks.
All right. Thom, anything you want to wrap with?
No, what I find interesting is the concordance between Jonathan's estimate that between 5 and 7 million Democratic votes either didn't get counted or got shifted toward Republicans. If they were shifted toward Republicans, it seems like those red areas, well, I don't know, but in any case, that number is almost identical to the number that Gregg said just simply weren't counted. And so if 80 or 90% of the votes that simply didn't get counted and the people who simply got turned away was real, that would account for that.
So if there were a message that you wanted to
hang on just a second. Gregg, you need to turn off your computer or disconnect, or maybe Rob, you can disconnect him before he starts watching porn or something.
Okay,
we can't hear you now, Gregg.
Yeah, he's and I thought I turned off the video.
Call him Jeff.
Yeah, you need to kill him.
I don't know how to do that.
Mouse over the upper right-hand corner of his.
I'm
screen.
on that. I'm trying to stop the video. Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah.
He doesn't know how to do it either. Okay.
You can also choose participants down at the bottom, Rob, and that'll give you a list of your participants, and you can kick them off because Gregg is still there.
It's frozen now, but
yeah.
No, I hit stop video. It didn't work.
Hit participants down at the bottom.
I did. That's what I went to. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's
Oh,
okay.
well.
So
terminate with prejudice.
yeah. So he doesn't know how to turn it off. God bless him. So Thom.
Yes.
What is there a message that we need to get out now? Gregg said that what Jonathan said about the problems, that the other problems with the election have been hidden over, glossed over, and ignored. What's your take on that?
I think that in the 2000 election, the whole hanging Chad thing provided a great excuse for the 2002 Help America Vote Act to, to give the state $6 billion to buy voting machines and create this whole infrastructure where Karl Rove could have great fun, particularly in 2004. I think similarly, this election, now that tens of millions of people who have never voted by mail before have voted by mail and experienced it, have experienced what I experienced when Louise and I first moved here to Oregon like 15 years ago, and were astonished at how easy and convenient, and you can sit with your computer and just Google all the weird judicial races and everything else. I mean, vote by mail is just better. You have better informed voters, you have higher participation, all that kind of stuff. And I think that all the craziness, including Trump's squealing about election fraud, radically strengthens the case for other states to do what Utah and Oregon and Washington State, and Colorado and Hawaii have done, which is go all vote by mail, all on paper. And then the only next step after that, in my mind, and unless I'm missing something here, Jonathan, is to make sure that the tabulator machines or that the scanning machines are running open source software and can be audited, and that the tabulator machines are also running open source software, are not proprietary, are not owned by some big corporation. They're government machines that have some sort of double or triple layer of security. That seems like that gets us to safe elections. Jonathan, what am I missing?
Well, California, but that was it. I think you're on the right track. I mean, this is not a hard fix. It requires a certain amount of political will and ability to sort of overcome some inertias. But from a technical standpoint, this is not a hard fix. We could do all of these things. Auditable and audited are kind of different steps in the process. I mean, a lot of things are now auditable. We think we've had a lot of interference with races that were basically run on paper with optical scanners in the past. However, there is a deterrent effect if it's auditable and if there is shown any significant, willingness to, dedication to the task of actually performing a serious audit. That should have a very, very powerful deterrent effect on fraud. It won't stop some of Gregg's, the stuff Gregg was talking about. I mean, that's a whole nother ball of wax that really is tremendously important. But we call it, Wasserman and Fitrakis came up with strip and flip. You strip down the electorate and then you flip whatever's left. I added fool to that, strip, flip, and fool. Fool is for disinformation campaigns. And, you see, it takes a lot of thumbs on a scale to turn, a country on its ear politically.
Well, this is also, Jonathan, if I could real quick, this is also where vote by mail helps, because here in Oregon, for example, when Louise and I moved back here, we lived here for 5 years, and then we moved to DC for 7 years, and then we moved back. And when we moved back here, I got my driver's license renewed, and I renewed my voter registration. Louise didn't. She didn't want to go through the hassle. She still had her DC license. It's illegal, but So when the state announced that they had mailed out the ballots, my ballot arrived in the mail and Louise's didn't. And in that moment, she was like, oh my God, I'm not registered to vote here. And so she immediately went on the Secretary of State's website and plugged in her information, and the ballot arrived 4 days later. And this was all 6 weeks before the election, lots of time to correct it. So once again, vote by mail eliminates that showing up at the last minute and discovering that you're being given a provisional ballot or that you're not on the list anymore. I mean, it's an early warning system. There are so many good things to vote by mail. We really need to be singing the praises of it and agreeing with Trump and his buddies. Yeah, this system is bizarre. It's corrupt. It's scattered in 1,000 pieces. It makes no sense in a lot of places. It can easily be, anybody could be robbed of their vote. Let's go to paper and let's do it by mail.
I did it a little differently. I wanted to do it. I was going to go vote in person, but I was afraid of long lines. But I didn't want to mail it in because I didn't trust Louis, the postmaster, Louis Joy. But they announced that you could go to a place and eventually a number of different places in the area where you could show up, they would print out a ballot for you. You would fill it in, put it in the first envelope, put it in the second envelope, and then put it in a box that a sheriff would deliver to have counted. And then you could go to a website the state had to show when your ballot was received and properly processed.
Right.
And that's another piece of it that I felt better about too.
You can do that here, and you can do that in the vote by mail states very easily.
Yeah.
In fact, here in Oregon, you can even sign up on the Secretary of State's site, and they will text message you when they get your vote, and they will text message you again when they count it.
Yeah, that's the way it should be.
Say what?
That's the way it should be.
Yeah.
I mean, the only issue with vote by mail really that came up this time around was obviously the co-option of USPS itself. And that is always potentially a danger that there's going to be some sort of partisan interference based on control of that.
But that's a federal crime, and it's pretty hard to fake. I mean,
well, no, but I mean, yeah, no, for an individual mail carrier, yeah, but when you delay the whole system, and I think now they're showing that a significant percentage of ballots were not delivered on time, and lo and behold, they targeted Democratic areas.
And then they had drop-off boxes in Texas, where they went from having them all over the place to one in a county.
One in the county. Well, that was a drop-off. That was not a vote by mail thing. But if you're forcing people into vote by mail, which I'm a fan of vote by mail as well. I mean, I live in California. They now had it for the first time. I think it worked quite well. The question is, what about in places where there's hostility and it's somehow permeated into the delivery system? What I'm really afraid of is, that internet voting to the rescue,
right?
Which sounds really good. It's even more convenient than vote by mail, and you don't even have to go to the mailbox, and you just open up your laptop and diddle diddle diddle, and there's your your vote is in. It's very seductive, and it's also extremely dangerous. Whoever controls that system, it's nowhere near as public a trust as even the post office is. And my God, whoever has the keys to the castle of that system can just literally, sit at home on election night.
Right. And people say, but wait a minute, you can, I can bank by mail and nobody's hacking into my banking account. And, that's all blah-de-blah. And the answer is just what you just said, Jonathan, that, if you're banking with Bank of America online, who holds the keys to that kingdom? Bank of America. But if you're voting in Georgia, who holds the key to that kingdom? Republican Secretary of State Raffensperger.
Right. And the other thing about it is if you're banking with Bank of America online, which of course, virtually all of us do in one way or another with some institution, and they go about stealing your money, I mean, you're going to be the first to know. Right. You're going to look at your bank statement and what happened to that check, or I didn't take out $10,000 or whatever, and you call their fraud line or you call whatever.
Plus you have FDIC insurance.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, there's insurance, but if they started pulling stunts where they were basically embezzling money, which is the equivalent of basically stealing or shifting votes, you have a lot of angry customers banging on the window of the bank and going, where the hell is my money? With a vote, because a vote is secret and you are not, there's no tangible tie between you and the actual cast ballot, you have no way of knowing what happens to your vote. In fact, these systems that tell you your vote was received and all that, and it was processed, those are all to the good, but they don't tell you anything about the aggregate count process. And that's where the internet voting would be especially dangerous, because you could get a notice that says, well, your vote was received, and you could look it up online, and yes, it was counted. But to tie that to the aggregate, when you're talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of actual ballots and votes, is really extremely difficult to do, and with the secret ballot especially. So internet voting, I mean, I think most of the experts are in line with the fact that it's an idea that is still many years away. And
let's talk about
there will be a big push for it, because there is this vacuum that was created by this election where other things didn't seem to work and everybody's arguing over them. Hey, why not go to internet voting? It's just something that really has to be watched and really hit hard if they start going in that direction.
And Tom, why do you think that the next election in 2024 a smarter person could pull it off?
You mean an effective fascist could get elected president?
Yeah, like you mentioned, Tom Cotton.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the sad reality, and I think a lot of this reflects very poorly on the Democratic Party. The sad reality is that when Donald Trump said to the American voters in 2016, I'm going to stop them from sending your jobs to China or Mexico, the vast majority of American workers said, good, thank you. When he said, I'm going to raise taxes on rich people, the vast majority of American voters said, yeah, great, do it. When he said, I'm going to come up with a healthcare program, it's not going to cost you as much as this one does, and we're going to get control of drug prices, people were like, yeah, please. I mean, he co-opted the progressive agenda that the Democratic Party will not adopt, or will not, more than half of the Democratic Party will not run on. And, particularly economic protectionism. And I mean, you've got Sherrod Brown and Bernie Sanders out there talking about it, and Elizabeth Warren, but, basically that's it. And so, the next guy who comes along is going to use that same populist rhetoric. And he's going to be a little less cynical than Trump, and he's going to be a whole lot more effective. He'll actually bring some of the jobs home. I mean, Hitler, invented the Volkswagen and built the Autobahn, and people loved him for it. In 1937, he was Man of the Year on Time magazine because he was literally the most popular politician on earth, Adolf Hitler, and beloved in Germany. I mean, the highest popularity rating in the history of polling. And this was all before he invaded Poland. And, and we all know now in retrospect what was going on underneath, but,
What was going on underneath?
Well, they were building this massive infrastructure for the final solution, and they were co-opting other countries' governments, and they were preparing their people for war, and they were, a large part of the economic stimulus that put Germany back together after World War II was building, their military hyperstructure. So, and America has all that, is all there. So I'm just concerned that if the Democrats don't start actually pursuing populist policies, Bill Clinton flipped the Democratic Party from being a progressive party, the Great Society, let's lift people out of poverty, let's provide housing to people as a right, let's make sure that every kid can get a decent education, let's make college cheap or free, let's provide Medicare and Medicaid medical services to everybody that needs it. I mean, that was the Great Society. That was the last progressive president that we had. Jimmy Carter was sort of halfway in between and never really had that much power.
Wait, who was the last progressive president? You're not talking about Bill Clinton.
I'm talking about Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Carter was kind of wishy-washy in the last 2 years of his presidency. He deregulated the airlines and deregulated trucking. And, that was the first 2 years of the Margaret Thatcher presidency. And so even Jimmy Carter was buying into neoliberalism. And then Bill Clinton came along in 92 and just basically took the old Republican platform while the Republican Party shifted even farther to the right. And both Bill Clinton and Barack Obama governed as neoliberal, right-wing Democrats or left-wing Republicans or moderate Republicans. And if the Democratic Party, if Joe Biden does that for 4 years, if he basically tries to reinvent the Clinton and Obama presidencies, we will have a Republican fascist get elected, Josh Hawley or Tom Cotton or one of these young guys who's like, the up and coming John Kennedy on the right. And they will flip this country hard to the right, and you will see democracy. Tom Cotton in 1 year can do what Donald Trump only dreamed of doing in 4 years.
Yeah, he'll certainly reintroduce the Sedition Act. I'm sure of that.
Oh yeah. We'll be back to John Adams in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
I mean, but Rob, for what it's worth, and Tom, my take on this is, the Democrats, almost anything they do with an election system this rigged is going to be into a very stiff wind. So as they go left, and I'm totally with you on Clinton and Obama and the fact that they have, shown just no spine, no courage. But you can really undermine the courage and spine of an organization or a party by rigging or in one way or another altering the outcome of elections. I mean, elections in this country, especially now that polling has been discredited, really they're the only official scorecard. And when you keep losing on the scorecard, then you turn to each other and you form the old circular firing squad. You scream at each other. We're seeing it already among the congressional Democrats. It's a great way to create disarray. When you think you're going to win and you've done all the things that should be necessary and sufficient to win, and you lose badly, as in 2010, 2014, even this election, then you get into a real disarray where nothing really prevails thematically. It's all reactive, and it's all very short-sighted. And that's really what we've seen from the Democrats. And when the Democrats tack left, they get punished for it. When they go to the center, they get punished for it. When the Republicans go further and further right, and you'd look at it and you'd say, well, this is fundamentally, if nothing else, a moderate country. They should absolutely get politically punished for doing the things that for instance, they've done in the last 4 years. And I mean, Donald Trump had coattails. He lost, but he had coattails. So the whole thing is just so, surrealistic and upside down in Alice in Wonderland. We would like to know, how much of that is organic, the things that Tom was describing, and how much of it is artificial, is really non-organic and is just manipulative. And we don't know that. It makes it very, very hard to pin down what's wrong. I mean, I was listening to On Point today, and the program tomorrow is going to be on polls and polling. And Meghna Chakrabarty basically was saying, okay, call in with your view of what's wrong with polling. And so, she's asking what's wrong with polling. Other people are asking what's wrong with the Democrats. A whole bunch of people, certainly anybody, to the left of center, is asking what's wrong with Americans. I mean, how could 73 million people vote for this, abomination? I mean, how is that possible? How could you get 10 million new votes after doing what he's doing? And really, none of them is asking. That is all based on the assumption that the polls are off from the vote counts, that the Americans all voted the way the vote counts say they were. And we really have just a very thin basis, if any, probably no basis for trust in that assumption. Unfortunately, this becomes a very, very bad time in the short term for questioning that assumption, because it just adds fuel to this dumpster fire that Donald Trump has started. If there is any ground for optimism at all, it's that going forward, when Donald Trump, the dust has settled on Donald Trump, maybe some of the themes that he has brought to prominence here, that we are in trouble when it comes to our election system, will somehow survive Donald Trump, and we will get some serious media attention and political attention to the very real problems of a concealed, computerized election system that has lots of voter suppression in it, that has lots of vulnerability to vote count manipulation in it. And it really should not be the basis of, what we are politically going forward.
And there's where we need a wrap, because we're coming up on the time. Tom, anything? That was a good summary too. Tom, anything you want to finish up with?
Well, I think the thing that really tells the bizarre nature of all this, and that really makes Jonathan's point, was that a week before the election, Fox News did a poll and found that 71% of their viewers, or no, it's 71% of Americans, 71% of Americans want Medicare for all. And I mean, it's like, what? And why is that not happening? Again, I think it's exactly what you and Gregg are saying, Jonathan. Our votes are not being counted.
Yeah. All right. This has been a great conversation. Really appreciated. We've had Gregg Palast, who's at greggpalast.com. He's an investigative reporter for BBC, The Guardian, and the Rolling Stone. And Thom Hartmann, who's the host of the Thom Hartmann Show, the ¡1 progressive daily radio show in America, and the author of over 30 books, including one on the history of votes being stolen, and the latest one on the history of monopoly. And Jonathan Simon, author of Code Red. His website's Code Red 2020. Thom Hartmann's is thomhartmann.com. Any way you spell it.
Yep.
And This is the Rob Call Bottom Up Show. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Tom.